Chinese officials have been claiming the epidemic is under control in China, but many cities are going back under lockdown, suggesting a second wave of outbreaks. Why does the world know so little about the virus until it's too late? An internal document issued by the Chinese regime, known as Document Number 3, seems to explain. After China and Russia closed its border, Chinese citizens stranded in between. In order to prevent them from coming in, rewards offered to report anyone who enters the country. An anonymous tip alerting police to discover a nursing home in New Jersey overwhelmed with dead bodies. UK's foreign ministry says the Chinese regime will have some hard questions to answer. This as Beijing comes under growing scrutiny over its handling of the virus outbreak. Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. A Taiwanese politician posted several documents online which suggest a second wave of outbreaks has begun in China. The documents from mainland China are urgent notices for 5 cities and 3 provinces, Hubei, Guangdong, and Hebei. Another notice appears to show one residential block in Wuhan has resumed lockdown because of an asymptomatic case. Authorities in another city in Hubei province have begun checking people's temperatures again after an asymptomatic case was confirmed. An urgent notice from a company in Guangdong says the virus is spreading again in its city and the situation is serious. It tells all employees to return to the company dorm and stay there. These are in addition to lockdowns in 2 districts in a city in Hebei province, which we reported on previously. Yesterday, we showed you the video of people waiting outside a hospital in Harbin City. A new video shows a residential block in the same city being sealed off with iron poles. The person taking the video says it's locked down again. In this video, a lady telling residents her residential block is now locked down. The on-screen text says, "There are no suspected cases in my residential block here in Harbin. I don't know why it's locked down again. This is really too hard for us." In the last 5 days alone, at least 9 businesses caught on fire in China. On the night of April 15th, a factory in Zhejiang province and a market in Hunan province caught fire. On April 14th, an auto parts factory in Jiangsu province, a food company in Hebei province, and a ceramic factory in Guangdong province. On April 12th, a chicken farm in Liaoning province, a warehouse in Hebei province, and a financial building in Guangdong province all caught on fire. On April 11th, a machinery company in Zhejiang province. Many businesses have been hit hard by the CCP virus. One netizen proposed 2 reasons for the fires. Either the businesses can't survive and the business owner wants to claim insurance, or as authorities urge companies to go back to work, since many of them have no customer orders, they just pretend they are working by turning on electric devices like kettles. The devices then malfunction and start the fires. This video shows the frustration felt by a factory owner in Guangdong. He's smashing his own machines. Canadian officials are calling for sanctions on Chinese officials involved in covering up the epidemic. Former Attorney General Erin Kotler criticized the regime for concealing the early stages of the epidemic and preventing countries around the world from preparing. And he's not alone. His supporters say the Canadian government could impose travel bans and freeze assets of human rights abusers under the Magnitsky Law. Document number 3. Many see it as one of the major reasons the world has been caught so off guard by the CCP virus. Now, for the first time, the entire copy of the Chinese regime's internal document is exposed to the public. The CCP virus, also known as the coronavirus, is a never-before-seen threat. That's why it's so critical for scientists and health experts around the globe to have access to information about it. It's especially needed to develop test kits, treatments, and vaccines, which save lives. But since the start of the outbreak, that data has been scarce. The outbreak has now developed into a global pandemic and has killed over 100,000 people outside of China. The outbreak was developing in China for months before it seriously hit other countries. So why was the data so limited? One document issued by the Chinese regime appears to explain. This version was obtained by Taiwanese media The Journalist, or Xinxinwen, on Wednesday. A portion of the document was also quoted in a bombshell report by Chinese media Caixin, as well as by a website run by the local government of a Chinese province. But no one really knows what it looks like. Its content reveals why the world knew so little about the virus until it was too late. The document was sent to local health officials on January 3rd. It ordered that, quote, those institutions or individuals who have already obtained the biological samples of the virus from relevant medical and health institutions should immediately destroy the samples or send them to a depository designated by the state. The document also demanded that without permission, no one should offer biological samples or relevant information about the samples to any institution or individuals. Lastly, it required that during the outbreak control period, no institutions or individuals should publish any information about pathogen testing or any lab results related to the virus. Relevant research papers or results need to be approved by government agencies before being published. How much information about the virus could survive these orders? That's why, despite obtaining the virus genome sequence as early as December 27th, no labs in China shared it with the world until 15 days later, on January 11th. According to Chinese media outlet Beijing News, a Shanghai lab ordered the virus sequence on January 5th. They reported the results to China's National Health Commission and recommended relevant prevention and control measures be taken in public places. One of the facility's experts later told the media that the findings were being taken very seriously. They described the whole process as heart-shaking and soul-stirring. China's higher-ups didn't get back to them, nor did they implement any measures. The Shanghai lab could do nothing but share the sequence on overseas virology websites on January 11th. But when Chinese authorities said no virus information was to be published, they meant it. The next day, on January 12th, authorities shut down the lab. The lab submitted an application 4 times for permission to reopen, but never heard back. It's unclear how well the Chinese regime understood the danger the virus presented when they issued document number 3 to ban the spread of information. Both before and after January 20th, when China admitted that there was human-to-human transmission, the regime told state media repeatedly that the virus was preventable and controllable. As of Wednesday, over 2 million people outside of China have contracted the virus. Over 100,000 have died. A new hotline set up by the Chinese regime is rewarding citizens for reporting anyone, including Chinese citizens who cross over the closed border with Russia and into China. NTD Xu Wenrong has more.
As the situation inside Heilongjiang province worsened, the Chinese regime last week temporarily closed that province's border with Russia. One Chinese lawyer says it's a way for the regime to shift blame.
They have a basic method of shifting the blame to others. They want to create the impression that the domestic cases are under control, and they would love to label all the new cases as imported cases. They are using this method to kind of shift people's attention from the real domestic situation.
On April 13th, Heilongjiang Provincial Authority announced it would reward citizens for handing over or reporting illegal entries at the border. This includes Chinese citizens coming from abroad. The reward per report could be more than $700.
I think this is a very cruel, inhumane, unethical, and illegal practice. They have deprived people of their basic human rights, treating their own citizens as terrorists and robbers.
As we previously reported, some Chinese citizens in Russia were sent back by the Russian government due to the pandemic, and some are returning home with the belief that the Chinese regime has things under control.
The Chinese Communist Party knows that Russia is sending away Chinese citizens, but the regime has closed its border. In fact, they are just trying to keep the number of so-called diagnosed to zero in their own country. To keep it like that. They don't care about the lives of their own citizens.
Chinese history expert Li Yuanhua said this situation contrasts with democratic countries where governments make every effort to send evacuation planes to China to pick up their own citizens and bring them to safety.
You can't ignore everything. The law, the basic rights and dignity of being human. just to combat the pandemic. This is against the law and the moral bottom line.
A resident in Harbin, Heilongjiang, agrees.
The Chinese regime is irresponsible. They should take the initiative to bring their own people back, and not to wait for another country to send them back.
In a video circulating online, a netizen said every day there are Chinese citizens crossing the border who get stuck there. Their tweet said these 31 Chinese citizens were stuck on the street between Russia and China for 12 days. They hope that the regime could arrange something, but in reality, they're wandering around as a result of arrangements made by the Chinese regime. Reporting by Shi Wenrong, NTD News.
And UK Foreign Minister Dominic Raab said China will have some hard questions to answer about how the pandemic started. Our UK correspondent Jane Worrell has more.
Dominic Raab, standing in for Boris Johnson, said there needs to be a deep dive review into how the outbreak happened in response to a question during the daily press conference. He warned that it cannot be business as usual with China after the crisis.
We ought to look at all sides of this and do it in a balanced way. But there's no doubt we can't have business as usual after this crisis, and we'll have to ask the hard questions about how it came about and how it couldn't have been stopped earlier.
He said the UK would very carefully look into how the outbreak happened and what could be done to prevent it happening in the future. He said the country would be working closely with its international partners, including the WHO. The UK has said it doesn't have plans to stop funding the WHO, which has come under scrutiny over its ties to Beijing and handling of the pandemic, although a spokesperson said the organisation must learn lessons. The UK is giving $81 million to the WHO. A number of senior Conservative politicians in the UK have been vocal about the Chinese regime recently, saying the state must face a reckoning over how the pandemic was handled. Jane Worrell, NTD News, London.
It's been discovered that the Chinese regime is using Facebook to push paid propaganda about the CCP virus outbreak. The ads have been viewed over 45 million times and praised China's response while calling President Trump racist.
Chinese state-run media is using paid advertisements on Facebook and Instagram to spread false information, rewrite China's part in the pandemic, and attack President Trump. The ads have been viewed around 45 million times since February 15th. They praised the Chinese Communist Party for its handling of the virus, without mentioning it silenced whistleblowers and destroyed virus samples. One video questions whether the virus actually originated in China, despite Chinese officials publicly admitting it did after pressure from President Trump. The ads also attacked Trump, calling him a racist and saying he mishandled the virus, which they claim could make the U.S. situation worse. The ads ran for months before Facebook flagged them and marked them as political. This means the reach is likely much larger than the reported 45 million views. Undisclosed political ads don't show who's financed them, making it harder for people to see that they're paid propaganda. Facebook is now working to label all state-controlled media pages, including the Chinese Communist Party's.
The U.S. says it suspects China of nuclear testing in violation of an international treaty meant to protect the world from nuclear weapons. A new report from the State Department says a Chinese testing site is raising concern.
Wednesday, the State Department warned China may be conducting secret nuclear tests, and if so, it could be violating an international ban on nuclear weapons testing. The State Department published its findings in its 2020 review of international compliance with arms control accords. It adds another layer of controversy to U.S.-China relations after Chinese officials tried to blame the U.S. military for the CCP virus. The State Department report points to a high level of activity at China's Lopner nuclear weapons test site throughout 2019 as cause for concern. It says China's use of explosive containment chambers, extensive excavation activities at Lopner, and blocking transparency of its nuclear testing activities as red flags. Countries that adhere to the zero-yield standard set out in the International Pact include the U.S., the UK, and France.
The situation in the U.S. is easing up a bit, with some states reporting fewer people infected every day. There are over 600,000 cases across the nation and more than 30,000 deaths from the CCP virus, yet almost 60,000 Americans have recovered. President Trump says the CCP virus has reached its apex in the U.S. NTD's Melina Weiskup brings us more.
CCP virus cases are easing up in some areas. And as it now stands, more Americans are recovering than passing away. According to the White House Pandemic Response Coordinator, Dr. Deborah Birx, 9 states have less than 30 new cases per day, saying the country as a whole is improving. New York, the hardest hit, is seeing improvements too, with the number of hospitalizations dropping and less people being put on ventilators. The state's daily death toll saw a significant drop for the first time this week, with 150 less deaths on Wednesday. New York Governor Andrew Cuomo says the first step to reopening will be to classify more businesses as essential.
The private sector now has to think about what they do and how they do it and how they can do it differently.
Reopening by May 1st might be possible for around 20 states, according to CDC Director Dr. Robert Redfield. But a number of states are expecting it will take longer. In 9 states, stay-at-home orders extend past May 1st, while 6 others have no specified end date. New York and its 6 surrounding states are coordinating efforts for reopening, while on the West Coast, California, Oregon, and Washington are working together to coordinate theirs. Melina Weisskopf, NTD News.
And as pressure on New York's hospitals begins to ease, Governor Andrew Cuomo said he's sending 100 ventilators to New Jersey. That's in addition to the 150 he sent to Michigan and Maryland yesterday. The Navy finds sailors infected with the CCP virus to be mostly asymptomatic. This after almost all crew members aboard the USS Theodore Roosevelt were tested.
Testing the entire crew of the virus-stricken U.S. aircraft carrier Theodore Roosevelt may have revealed a clue about the pandemic. The majority of positive cases are among sailors who aren't shown symptoms. The possibility that the virus spreads in stealth mode among young, healthy people could have major implications for policymakers. It also asks questions about how well the virus spread can be captured if only those suspected to have it are tested. Testing is almost complete for the aircraft carrier's 4,800-member crew. It's a big move in a case that has already led to the firing of the carrier's captain and the resignation of the Navy's acting secretary. Roughly 60% of the over 600 sailors who have tested positive so far have not shown symptoms. The Navy didn't speculate about how many might later develop them. The figure is higher than the 25 to 50% range offered by the White House Coronavirus Task Force member, Dr. Anthony Fauci.
A CDC report says more than 9,000 of the nation's healthcare workers have been infected by the virus, but some say the true number is much higher. The number is likely an underestimate because most reports of COVID-19 cases do not include whether the person works in healthcare. The CDC says more than a half of those healthcare workers got infected on the job. 90% of them were not hospitalized. A CDC official says health workers did not realize at first how quickly people without symptoms can spread the disease. An extraordinary number of deaths over the weekend appear to have overwhelmed a nursing home in northern New Jersey, where police responding to an anonymous tip found more than a dozen bodies.
Police say that 5 bodies were found Sunday and that 13 more were found Monday at the Andover Subacute and Rehabilitation Center in Andover Township.
We removed 13 bodies on Monday night. There were believed to be a total of 17 there.
Officials say the remains were among 68 deaths linked to the home, including both residents and 2 nurses.
There is a backlog of information and numbers that are being thrown out there, from whether it's coming from inside the facility, from upwards at the state level, down to the local level.
The New York Times reported that at least 26 of those deaths were confirmed to be related to the CCP virus. Police say that the nursing home is understaffed and needs protective gear, which it got yesterday. For most people, the new coronavirus causes mild or moderate symptoms, such as fever and cough that clear up in 2 to 3 weeks. For some, especially older adults and people with existing health problems, it can cause more severe illness, including pneumonia and death.
Hospitals in New York City have their hands full taking care of virus patients. One hospital in Manhattan is adjusting its policies to allow some comfort for patients and their families.
As the number of infections climbs in New York City, doctors at Mount Sinai Beth Israel Hospital in Manhattan face a staggering challenge. But amid the tragedy, a measure of comfort for patients and their families. Until recently, if you had the virus, you wouldn't be able to see any visitors. Doctors' orders. but that rule has since been reversed.
We decided to change it for patients where they're very near the end of life because we wanted to give family members the opportunity to be with their patients.
He added the hospital is doing everything it can to minimize hardship for patients and their loved ones.
I think that that's one of the most tragic pieces of this disease is because it's so contagious that people do end up just dying alone.
But among the suffering, he said there's hope in all the medical staff coming from other states and hospitals wanting to help.
And the virus crisis gripping New York City, a nonprofit is helping to ease the burden on the city's emergency rooms. It's taking the medicine on the road to treat the city's homeless.
Project Renewal's medical van makes its way around the city to deal with any medical needs. The van stops at shelters and soup kitchens 2 to 3 times a day.
Right now we're trying to keep as many people as we can out of the emergency rooms by providing our doctors and other providers out to the shelters to assess clients if they have
Dr. Edelstein said the van staff treat patients on the assumption they have the virus. New York has more than 700 designated isolation units for homeless residents with virus symptoms.
We haven't been seeing a huge surge in patients that have had COVID-like or flu-like symptoms. We have had a lot that do, but mostly we're still trying to deliver primary care services to those that need it.
The city was tracking some 400 homeless residents among those who tested positive for the virus, and 27 more have died.
And in a business roundup, the Fund for Small Business Support Loans is maxed out. Over 1 million loans totaling $349 billion have been approved to help companies keep employees on payroll.
The government's Paycheck Protection Program has hit its $349 billion limit and is out of money. 1.6 million forgivable loans have been approved to help small businesses through the crisis. More money is expected to pour into the program, but the details are still being finalized. Investment bank Morgan Stanley's first quarter profit dropped 30%. The company's CEO, recovering from the CCP virus himself, says the stress on the global economy is real and will take time to recover. The International Monetary Fund says 5 nations have pledged a combined $11 billion to loan funds for poorer countries. Japan, the UK, France, Canada, and Australia will help less wealthy countries prepare to battle the epidemic. Verizon has bought video conferencing software BlueJeans for less than $500 million. BlueJeans is a competitor to Zoom, whose share price plummeted recently because of serious security flaws. Verizon was to utilize it for telemedicine and distance learning.
And the UK's Prime Minister is still recovering from the CCP virus. That while the country's lockdown has been extended.
With Britain having one of the world's highest death tolls, citizens will now be in lockdown for at least another 3 weeks. The announcement was made by stand-in leader Dominic Raab. Prime Minister Boris Johnson is still recovering from the virus. With Portugal's number of confirmed cases up to nearly 20,000, the country is extending its state of emergency too. The extra 2 weeks will go in effect tomorrow. And in Italy, the death toll keeps climbing despite a downward trend in the number of new cases. The country's new normal means routine tests for citizens and sanitization of everything, from streets to shops to hospitals. Singapore reported its largest jump in daily confirmed cases today, over 700 in 24 hours. On the bright side, there were no new deaths, leaving their number of casualties at just 10.
The French Armed Forces Ministry says nearly 700 of its sailors have tested positive for the new virus.
Nearly 700 sailors assigned to the French aircraft carrier Charles de Gaulle have tested positive for the coronavirus. The French Armed Forces Ministry said on Wednesday almost 1,800 mariners, nearly all from the carrier, had been tested so far. Results have yet to come in for a third of those tests. Charles de Gaulle initially set sail for the Mediterranean in January to support French military operations against Islamic militants in Iraq and Syria. The carrier had most recently been taking part in exercises with Northern European navies in the Baltic Sea. It arrived home in France 2 weeks earlier than expected, after around 40 crew members showed signs of COVID-19 symptoms. Sick crew members were placed under strict observation on board the nuclear power carrier, and a team ready to carry out the first coronavirus tests was airlifted to the vessel. Crew from the Charles de Gaulle and the frigate Chevalier Paul are now in confinement within their naval base. Charles de Gaulle's warplane and helicopter pilots are also in quarantine. The Armed Forces Ministry said the Navy chief has ordered an investigation into the outbreak.
Contact tracing has been used for decades to control the spread of infectious diseases. But what is it exactly?
What is contact tracing, and how can it help stop the spread of infectious diseases? The basic idea is simple. Track down infected people, then find everyone who has been near them and encourage those people to stay home until it's clear they are not sick. Large portions of the world's population are currently on lockdown, but it's when restrictions are lifted that contact tracing is likely to become even more important. Doctors say that once people return to school and work, each infected person could easily come into contact with 1,000 others. But contact tracing requires extensive testing, with a need for hundreds of thousands of health investigators to carry out the tests in the US alone. Technology could hugely improve efficiency. Apple and Google say they are collaborating on apps that can identify people who have crossed paths with a contagious patient and alert them. That does raise some privacy concerns, though. Such a database could be a hacker's goldmine and be prone to governmental abuse. Apple and Google said that apps seeking to use its tools would need to be voluntary, but unless they are widely used, they won't achieve their purpose.
We are starting off with President Trump's message to truckers today. He called them heroes for trucking during these hard times. And people across the country are also showing their appreciation. NTD's Miguel Moreno has more on that.
You wouldn't switch jobs with anybody, would you, huh?
On Thursday, President Trump recognized those who deliver the oh-so-important supplies that hospitals and grocery stores need.
To every trucker listening over the radio or behind the wheel, I know I speak for the 330 million plus Americans that we say, thank God for truckers.
Countless others are also cheering for truckers. Good Samaritans across the country have been showing truck drivers their appreciation for their long hauls amid the pandemic. Like Tina Peterson of FedEx, someone gave a hot meal to her and her husband.
My husband Dave and I have had a family give us a meal out of the back of their pickup truck at a rest area that they put together for truck drivers. We've received thumbs up from motorists on the highways and have seen people standing on overpasses waving American flags to the passing trucks.
The president gave an award to representatives of America's truck drivers at the event. He also pointed to the Paycheck Protection Program for small businesses. The fund is now empty, but he said he's looking to replenish it with $250 billion so truckers get the pay they need. Miguel Moreno, NTD News, New York.
Here at China in Focus, we bring you truthful, unbiased reporting. Don't forget to follow us on social media for the latest updates. See you tomorrow.